All right, can I get your name and then who you are and what we're doing here today?
My name is Wayne Codner. I'm the mayor of Richland Town Borough, and today we're remembering the events of 9/11.
And what does this mean for you to be able to host this in your town?
It gives me great pride that such a great community like Richland Town Borough gets an opportunity to thank all those involved, especially the first responders and our fire company for all that they do and all they sacrifice for us to be a little bit safer. That day was a big day, an important day, and we're this year paying special attention to the people of Flight 93 who made the ultimate sacrifice for the country.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
Barking. Yeah. Trying to talk. More bells.
Thank you very much for being here. On behalf of the Richland Town Borough Council, the Parks and Recreation Committee, and myself, Mayor Wayne Codner, we want to say how much we appreciate you being here for us to remember the day of September 11, 2001. On that day, America's fiber was tested, and we rose to the occasion because we stuck together. Especially our first responders, our fire company, our police, our EMS, and all the other brave people who go into danger as we run away. This year, we're specifically paying attention to the events of Flight 93 that went down in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. At this time, I'm going to ask the fire company to read the names of those fallen firefighters at what we now call Ground Zero.
Joseph Agnello, Brian Ahern, Eric Allen, Richard Allen, James Alstino Apostol Jr., David Arce, Louis Arena, Carl Asaro, Greg Atlas, Gerald Atwood, Gerald Baptiste, Gerard Barbara, Matthew Barnes, Arthur Barry, Stephen Bates, Carl Bedigian, Stephen Belson, John Bergen, Paul Beyer, Peter Bielfeld, Brian Bilcher, Carl Beanie, Christopher Blackwell, Michael Bocchino, Frank Bonomo, Gary Box, Michael Boyle.
Kevin Bracken, Michael Brennan, Peter Brennan,
Alstino Apostol Jr., David Arce, Louis Arena, Carl Asaro, Greg Atlas, Gerald Atwood, Gerald Baptiste, Gerard Barbara, Matthew Barnes, Arthur Barry, Stephen Bates, Carl Bedigian, Stephen Belson, John Bergen, Paul Beyer, Peter Bielfeld, Brian Bilcher, Carl Beanie, Christopher Blackwell, Michael Bocchino, Frank Bonomo, Gary Box, Michael Boyle.
Kevin Bracken, Michael Brennan, Peter Brennan, Brethel, Patrick Brown, Andrew Brunn, Vincent Brunton, Ronald Buca, Greg Buck, William Burke Jr., Donald Burns, John Burnside, Thomas Butler, Patrick Byrne, George Kane, Salvatore Calero, Michael Camarada, Brian Canizaro, Dennis Carey, Michael Carlo, Michael Carroll, Peter Carroll, Thomas Casaria, Michael Cawley, Vernon Cherry, Nicholas Chiafalo, John Chipura, Michael Clark, Stephen Coakley,
Robert Cordis, Ruben Correa, James Coyle, Robert Crawford, John Chrissy, Dennis Cross, Thomas Colin III, Robert Coratola,
Alan Feinberg, Michael Fiore, John Fisher, Andre Fletcher, John Florio, Michael Fodor, Thomas Foley, David Fontana, Robert Fody, Andrew Fredericks, Peter Freud, Thomas Gambino Jr., Peter Ganshi Jr., Charles Garbarini, Thomas Gardner, Matthew Garvey, Bruce Gary, Gary Guidell, Edward Garrity, Dennis Germain, Vincent Giamona, James Giverson, Ronnie Geis, Paul Gill, John Ginley, Jeffrey Giordano,
John Giordano, Keith Glasgow, James Gray, Joseph Greslak, Jose Guadalupe, Jeffrey Guha, Joseph Gulixon, Michael Healy, John Hefferman, Ronnie Henderson, Joseph Henry, William Henry, Thomas Hetzel, Brian Hickey, Timothy Higgins, Jonathan Holman, Thomas Hollahan, Joseph Hunter,
William Hines, Jonathan Webby Frederick III, William Johnson, Andrew Jordan, Carl Joseph, Anthony Jovic, Thomas Kennedy, Ronald Kerwin, Michael Kiefer, Robert King Jr., Scott Kopko, Neil Levy, Daniel Libretti,
Carlos Lilo, Robert Linane, Michael Lynch, Michael Lyons, Patrick Lyons, Joseph Maffeo, William Mahoney, Joseph Maloney, Joseph Marchbanks Jr., Charles Margiotta, Kenneth Marino, John Marshall, Peter Martin, Paul Martini, Joseph Miscali, Keith Roy Maynard, Ryan McAleese, John McAvoy, Holmes McCain, William McGinn, William McGovern, Dennis McHugh, Robert McMahon, Robert McPadden, Terrence McShane, Timothy McSweeney, Martin McWilliams, Raymond Meisenheimer, Charles Mendez, Steve Mercado,
Thomas O'Hagan, Samuel O'Tice, Patrick O'Keefe, William O'Keefe,
Orion Palmer, Frank Palumbo, Paul Pansini, John Piolio, James Papageorge, Robert Paro, Darrell Pearsall, Glenn Perry, Philip Petty, Kevin Pfeiffer, Kenneth Phelan, Christopher Pickard, Sean Powell, Vincent Preciado, Kevin Pryor, Richard Prunty, Lincoln Quape, Michael Quilty, Ricardo Quinn, Leonard Regaglia, Michael Ragusa, Edward Rawl, Adam Rand, Donald Reagan, Robert Reagan, Christian Reaganhard,
Kevin Riley, Vernon Richard, James Richies, Joseph Ravelli, Michael Roberts, Michael E. Roberts, Anthony Rodriguez, Matthew Rogan, Nicholas Rosamondo, Paul Ruback, Stephen Russell, Michael Russo, Matthew Ryan, Thomas Sabella, Christopher Santora, John Santora, Gregory Sausadou, Dennis Sakuro, John Sosserat, Fred Sheffield, Thomas Chafoles, Gerard Sharang, Gregory Sikori, Stephen Siller, Stanley Schmegler Jr., Joseph Spoor, Lawrence Stack, Timothy Stackpole.
Gregory Stack, Jeffrey Stark, Benjamin Suarez Seawich, Paul Tegmeyer, John Tierney, John Tipping II, Hector Tirado Jr., Richard Van Hine, Peter Vega, Lawrence Velling, John Vigiano II, Sergio Venezuela, Lawrence Virgilio, Robert Wallace, Jeffrey Walls, Michael Marchallo, Patrick Waters, Kenneth Watson, Michael Weinberg, David Weiss, Timothy Welty, Eugene Whalen, Edward White, Mark Whitford, Glenn Wilkinson, John Williamson, David Woolley, Raymond York.
For us to remember all those names, they're embossed in history, and they still mean something to all their families. We have a piece of the debris here for all in attendance if they wish to visit it after our ceremony. At this time, I'd like to ask the young people to step forward so that they can say what they know about that day.
I was crashed when a plane got hijacked and fell.
I'd like to bring forth our keynote speaker, Mr. Ed Root, and he is going to introduce himself.
Thank you. My name is Ed Root. My cousin Lorraine Bay was the senior flight attendant on Flight 93 on September 11th. I had some prepared remarks here that I wanted to jot down so I wouldn't forget things, but I was frankly so impressed with your ceremony here and what you've done that I'm just going to maybe wing it for a few minutes if you don't mind. Everyone remember when they heard about Pearl Harbor, or when I was growing up and I was in junior high school, everybody knew where they were when they heard about John F. Kennedy. Those are things that strike with you and never, ever leave you. On September 11th, my wife and I were in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We were coming home from London. And a children born anniversary, someone was sick, she would send him a card. At least 3 people that we know of received cards after September 11th from her that she had mailed on the way to the airport that morning. So getting back to my wife and I, turned back to England. We were stuck in England until Friday. We finally got home on Friday, and there's a whole big story about how we finally got back. Never got out to, and as we were in the airport in England, we were able to reach my daughter, and that's when we finally found out about Flight 93, and we found out about the rain. We didn't know anything about it for quite a while. So it took me some time to get out to Somerset County to see the site of the plane crash. And as time went on, I became more and more involved with Flight 93. We started a family group, and I became part of that family group and was on the board from 2005 on. The memorial that you see there, so I don't know how many of you have ever been out there. If you have not, I would encourage you to go there. I was there this morning with my wife. I brought some brochures here afterwards. If anyone wants to take them, you're more than welcome. So it's a magnificent place. It didn't start out that way. They had a competition, had 1,000+ entries for the design for the Flight 93 Memorial. They had 2 juries. The first jury was family members, local people from Somerset County, professional people, architects, plans people, that kind of thing. And they took those 1,000+ designs and they culled it down to 5 finalists. A second jury, same thing, family members, local people, professional design people, had to pick the winning design. I was fortunate enough to be on that jury that selected the final design for the memorial that we see there today. It's a very special place. The memorial now is over 2,200 acres where that plane went down. The wall we wanted to get to, because of what you're doing here tonight, is that over the years, I've met people because of my involvement that I would have never have met. We're friends with these people. We're happy when they have births in the family. We're sad when someone passes in their family. We've driven out there just to go to funerals for some of the volunteers that we've really got to know. So it's a very, very special place for the volunteers and for the people out there. So I've met all kinds of people. I've met presidents, I've met senators. I think their philosophy is basically to stall as long as they can, and they've been stalling for all these years because they don't want it to go to trial, because they know they're guilty and they just want to stall. When my daughter and I went down there, we were there for a week. There were other family members that were there. He and his wife just had a little baby girl. His wife was a police officer. So what they would do every day, as one of them came on duty and the other went off on duty at the police department, Maura went to work. It was her trap. They never got to her in time. Other fellow that we were down there with, his only son was an emergency responder. Only son, same thing. He went in, never came back out. They didn't find his body until October. So it's very special here, as you have honored these folks. And we honor Flight 93 because the folks on Flight 93 that day, they had a couple of things that the folks in the other planes and the folks on the ground didn't have. They had knowledge. They actually knew about the other attacks, and they had time. Now, they didn't have a lot of knowledge. They didn't have a lot of time, but they knew if they didn't act, things would only get worse. Now, certainly, they possibly thought they could save their own lives. One of the passengers had a pilot's license, so there was hope. They banded together, they talked it out, and they acted. But they certainly knew that if they didn't act, they didn't know it was going to be the capital or what, but they knew it would be worse. We've all learned since that day that the terrorists are willing to die for their cause. Their cause is death. They save nothing, they build nothing, they create nothing. The cause of the folks at Flight 93 was life. Just like the cause of those who rushed into the buildings. The first responders who came to Flight 93 were there within 15 minutes of that plane crashing. There was nobody left to save. So I encourage you all, it's not a bad drive, it's a beautiful drive, 78, 81 Turnpike, and you're there. I do have some brochures here. If anyone has any questions for me afterwards about my involvement or anything else, I'd be happy to share them with you if I can. So thank you for coming, and thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
At this time, please face our flag for the playing of the national anthem.
like dogs.